All right, so this started out as a presentation on being a smarter Drupal superhero because over the years, volunteerism in Drupal has changed. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how folks who have done a lot of volunteer work can sort of refocus their volunteer effort if they're going to continue to do volunteer site building. Amy June does an excellent session on volunteer contrib work to core and modules and maintenance. This presentation focuses a little bit more on, a lot more on volunteer site building and how that used to be a key factor in growing the Drupal community. So the first part is to ask characteristics of a Drupal superhero. And for those of you that have been in Drupal since, 10 years or so back, you know the history of volunteer site building as being part of Drupal, but that is definitely a new concept to anybody who's joined the community in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because it has somewhat dropped off. Back in the day, hold on, I've got to move the little images of, if it'll let me move. Back in the day, maybe Amy June knows, maybe Amy June doesn't know this, Sprint website building, the idea was to be a Drupal superhero. The idea was to sprint build a complete Drupal CMS website in a day for a charity with a hangover from the camp party the night before where you met the client, and doing that without making the participating client cry. Now, I don't know if that was the case at every Drupal camp, but it was, quite honestly, truthfully, because I was there, I lived it. That's how my first site got built, how it was done. I do believe there probably was something about if you made your client cry, you had to buy a round of beer for everybody at the following party. But what happened was a lot of Drupal superhero burnout, sometimes at the actual build, where the back-end developers were asked to be the team lead, and some of them really wanted to be working on core code contribution or module contribution, or had just gotten themselves jobs and had to go to work the next morning, really didn't want to be cranking out another simple site, a simple snowflake-sized site. So what was happening was that Sprint building an incomplete Drupal CMS website, and it ended up taking far longer than a day, and it still made their participating client cry after they spent the extra time. So the sprint building concept sort of slowed down or to a stop. What happened though was a lot of one site stands where sites were built to try to meet that $1 million or million site quota in the Drupal community, trying to build 1 million Drupal sites. And now they're down to about 600,000 Drupal sites because some of those sites never got finished, or fell apart and didn't get maintained. And so here we are today with 400 less Drupalers. So mandatory charity volunteerism, I think really benefited the Drupal community in the beginning, but there were some serious resentment that grew over time. And so even though I'm going to advocate for it today, I want you to be aware that I am aware of why there might be resentment. So I put together a whole list of reasons that why in 2012, free charity site building was meant to build a client base and to build students' resumes when everybody was still a freelancer, when the dev studios were just getting, started years later. And to 2021, where there was literally conversation this week on the Florida Slack feed about whether or not it's time to do paid core contribution using organizations' sponsor fees for camp, using the leftover camp money to try to entice core contribution. So things have really changed over the last almost decade. Why? Well, Sometimes, there's burnout because organizations, small charities might have cried poor, but then wasted money elsewhere. Prior volunteerism was never recognized or rewarded. Prior volunteer projects or outputs weren't ever respected. They were left and dumped by the organizations that they were given to because they were free. Other people got rewarded for someone else's work, but then left them out at the party. Organizations forced them to sacrifice family fun time or joy or energy or the class that they were participating in, or their group or their social camp as the camp culture forced their volunteerism, which took away family time. It potentially exhausted some of the participants felt exhausted by having to mask and filter themselves for code of conduct reasons. And I have to be quite honest, back in 2012, 2013, code of conduct didn't exist. So you literally met your developers at the party. So you met some of them while they had already had a few beers and they're trying to pick up a client. That's how they were doing it back then. And freelancers were trying to do business literally at the bar. And we're finding it challenging how to do that with predominantly, especially in the small charities, female marketing folks or charity founders and that type of thing. So code of conduct, I think, came to be after that experience. For some of them, smiles and kindness were actually an authority trauma trigger. Dealing with friendly females was not comfortable for all of the developers. And so some of them felt challenged with their people skills over time. Some of them prefer just to be micromanaged, to just be told what they need to do, to have a clear dominance figure in their life that just makes their life simpler. And not every charity founder or marketing person or site building person or communications person had the time to micromanage a developer, nor the skills to know what to tell them to do. Here's an interesting comment that came back. My schadenfreude was socially awkward to them. If you've never heard the term schadenfreude, it's finding joy or entertainment in other people's misery. So people that have that personality trait that don't mind seeing other people miserable and laugh about it had a hard time fitting in with the charity sector, who were all about trying to serve the needs of those who were struggling. So it could have been, it in some cases was difficult personality wise. In some cases, there was a complaint that they couldn't escape the control. The mission creep, the lists got longer, it was restrictive, the demands got bigger, and they just always wanted the work done for free. The fact that volunteer work can cost money if you're traveling, driving somewhere to meet up, or that it pesters their friends to help with projects, to do the volunteer work if they need coaching or some part of the information filled in. So the idea of this talk is, can we just wipe the slate clean and rethink the solutions? At this point, the idea of contributing or volunteering to do site build work for charities that had their sites done in 7, may need site repair work done, may need to be upgraded, or may need to find a way to stay in Drupal 7 and continue with a site that's still active, is literally may or may not be done because of the community outlook on site build volunteerism at this point. So do we want to wipe the slate clean and rethink solutions, or just wipe them off the slate? Because some of the response that the community has given small charity sites that come back for repair work or help or rebuilding or upgrading, unknowingly needing to be transferred from 7 to 8 to 9, was just go use WordPress. Just go away. So is that the sentiment of the entire Drupal community, or is that the sentiment of a few members of the Drupal community with the loudest voice who are suffering from the most resentment at the moment of what they've been put through over the last decade? Our thought is that it's time to give up trying to be a superhero, trying to do it all by yourself without a sprint, a sprint project put together. And instead of being a hero, just try to be legendary, which maybe sounds easier, maybe sounds harder. But first, okay, This is a funny little interruption to the story, but just a quick quiz question from your guest presenter today. That's me. Do you know how to code? Which set of codes explains the shape that you just saw? Is it Model A, Model B, or Model C? You want to see it again? Do you know how to code that? Model A, Model B, or Model C? Anybody? Actually, this is why I don't say that I'm not a coder, because I do code, but I only code in Crochet. I don't code in Drupal. That shape is actually built off the Fibonacci sequence, and the models that I've shown you, Model A and Model B, look a lot more like the figure at the top, the red sort of frilly figure at the top. Model C is actually a model of the known universe. It is hyperbolic crochet model of the infinite fractal expansion of our universe and other organic objects like conifers and corals, which is used by mathematics professors to teach and explain how important it is as we continue into space travel, that the further we fly our rockets out into space, the more important it is to know the equation, which explains how the universe is continuing to move in an expanded way. So it's kind of important stuff. It just looks like fluffy little bath scrubbies there, but really crochet code is literally the meaning of the universe, space-time continuum and all that fun stuff. We even had an after party where you could learn to crochet a Fibonacci scarf, a nice little spirally thing, wouldn't that be fun? Why am I even showing you this? Well, because I really want to learn how to code and write command lines so that I can maintain my very own website in Drupal just as much as you probably want to learn how to code and craft a model of the ever-expanding universe in abbreviated crochet and make yourself a swirly spiral scarf. Any takers? Why I include this is so often as a customer, as a client, when I go back to camp looking for the genius bar of who can help repair something or fix something, they forget that I'm there as a small website owner and customer who's come to camp and sometimes try to make the assumption that I want to learn Drupal. And so we'll take the time to try to want to explain to me how they can teach me how to code in Drupal. When that happens, I try to remind them that I have a lot of other things to do as a charity founder. And yes, my website's in Drupal, but I'm here looking to really hire more people, even if it's for a short task. I'm not necessarily looking to be coached to have to do my own stuff. I have to maintain the content of my site, and that's more than enough. I'm not really, I can't say I ever want to learn to do the writing command lines and that type of stuff, even though I come to SFDUG and even though I come to camps, any more than you want to learn how to crochet. But what we both do is important, and we both need each other, and there's a reason I'm there, and there's a reason I'm there looking for you. So how does a broken snowflake-sized website ever get repaired? That is a good question, because how do I put in an RFP for some help to fix something which I can't even explain in an RFP? I have to go back to camp. I have to mingle at the after party. I have to try to find the geniuses at the bar, literally, to help fix things, because our site was somewhat we were somewhat orphaned. The front end coder at the time didn't necessarily have access to the back end as an admin, and her skills evolved over the 7 years of being our front end developer. So, we've had to go hunting. And that all happened at camp, because once upon a time, not so many years ago, the art and mastery of the client pickup experience happened at the bar, happened at camp, where a freelancer would connect with, and sometimes there were concurrent camps running of charities and government and Sometimes they still have that now, where the universities and the hospitals and the libraries and the charities would get together for their own track of programs. And they would commingle those folks in with the developers so that developers looking for work could connect with the people who were looking to hire. And they were told to try to connect and talk about quality, speed, or cost. What's the most important? Because you can probably only handle 2 of those things. And they were taught how to pick up clients, ultimately. And the training and team building, the camaraderie of the site build code sprint worked well for the coders, potentially. And Mr. Anello would be the person in the back of the boat there without a helmet on. He was, I would have to say, Jedi level code sprint coordinator, could agile put together and manage multiple charities getting their sites built or almost built in a day, and trying to keep everyone from making their clients cry. Was really a master at that chaos, because it's chaos in a day to get that done. They didn't just talk about contributing or spend a half day. It was a whole day of sweaty, messy, hard coding and client communication work. And it was a rite of passage. And some of them came out of it Jedi level freelancers. They started their own companies. They learned how to communicate with their clients enough, how to translate things into simple speak, and were able to start their own businesses. Some of them came out Jedi skill level dev agencies or design studios, where they had great teammates who, didn't want to do the client pickup side of it. They wanted to leave that to a marketing company, and some front-end folks in an office that could handle getting them just the things that they like to do, the tasks that they were good at. And some of them figured out that they loved the sprint and the chaos, and tried to start doing sprints in their own camps or their own areas. And would repeat the sprint today because they're so good at it, thinking that's the way to solve it, a rebuild as well. Here's the problem. Superhero burnout. Over time, something quietly went missing. It really did. What went missing? Probably the winds of volunteerism. As burnout started to happen, the sites that got built weren't necessarily coming back to camp. Somehow it got more technical, and the charities that were blessed with a Drupal site weren't getting the support because they weren't reconnecting, and they didn't know how to write a work request and where to even go to hire helpers. They would literally call back to camp and say, who can you send me? Or look for, recruitment groups that could just pass the name back if something went broken. Or look to their web hosting companies to solve it and to get them out of a mess when their site had gone abandoned and hacked. So this talks a little bit about, what are your belief system on volunteerism and moral offsets? I'm not really going to go through this too much, other than the fact that this is sort of like, I put this on here as like a thermometer. Really, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir today, that most of you have a volunteerism attitude. You've already expressed that you want to volunteer, whether it's contributing to code and modules, core, or contributing directly to buildings. Some of you are already working with charities. People do sort of run on this spectrum, though, that, some people opt out of it. They're at a level 4. They're absolutely not going to do free site build work. And some people are addicted to it, and, they love it. And they may love a portion of it more than other parts of it, but then they end up with so many sites that they have to maintain that it becomes martyrdom, because if they built it and no one else is there to maintain it, what happens to that addiction becomes overwhelming. So they start out as heroes and end up martyrs, and that's not a good balance either. So our focus is to try to help people stay somewhere in the recreational to sustainable side of that, between 6 and 10 is our ultimately, as an activities professional, part of our charity's focus is volunteerism as recreation for the nursing home elders. We believe that volunteerism should be fun and should be sustainable and help sustain you. So I absolutely hate asking a volunteer to do a portion of a big task that they don't like, because that to me goes against the philosophy of our charity itself. So, what is your knowledge level of the nonprofit and foundation and publicly supported charity sector? If you're going to do volunteer work for a charity, what do you know about charities? Do you know if you're getting involved with a charity that really needs your help and, for free or for a reduced rate? Or are they a huge multi-billion-dollar charity where the president of the charity is making a six-figure salary, and you need to really rethink, just because they're a nonprofit, should you be doing that work for them for free? There's a whole long list of variations in charities, what classifies them as an organization, and the other things. The second bottom half of that list is all the other responsibilities that charity founders have aside from their website. So maintaining their website might be a handful enough, let alone learning code to correct something when it's wrong, or learning more about Drupal to know how to describe what's wrong so that they can hire someone to come in and fix it. There's a reason I definitely promote the idea of charities being able to return to camps and have that sort of genius bar, Drupal genius bar experience, because sometimes they need to talk out what's wrong, to be told, and to have that translated to the developers on what actually needs fixed. So they don't necessarily have the time to learn Drupal, to maintain a Drupal site. The challenge for Drupalers, for developers, is differentiating between charities and small clients. You don't know by looking at them. You don't even sometimes know by looking at their site whether they're a big organization or a small organization, who's really trying to keep the boat patched together with duct tape and zip ties and needs your help, versus who's living life on the happy as a charity, in a big cruise ship, and probably doesn't need you working past midnight till 2-3 in the morning to get stuff done for free for them. So how do you differentiate? Well, this is why I personally would like to stay involved with the camps and find a way to make that even more supportive, is to help developers sort of vet that out, because it's a lot to learn. All of this long list is a lot to learn. Understanding the difference between a 501c3 and a 509A2 status, knowing the difference between whether they file a 990 or an EZ or a 990N. That tells you a lot. Just asking that one question tells you a lot more about the charity than what's your budget for this new site. Knowing the form they file for the state, for the federal government, can tell you more about their financial status. Are they not even a charity? Are they just a grassroots organization that needs a site and have no money coming in? Are they a big association that has a big event? Are they a foundation, which is literally set up to give money away? Are they a benefit corporation, which is a business that wants to do good in the world? Or are they a donor advised fund, which is literally something that's set up to essentially hoard money? So you need to know. And if you don't know all of these things, then it might be handy to have a charity representative on your team as a Drupal community to ask, to step in and maybe, kind of vet that out at the bar, at the after party, if that's how you're picking up a client. So it is professional to ask that information. Should you ask a charity for tangible appreciation or compensation or substantiation? Those are receipts of your in-kind donations. Yep. It's sustainable. That's what helps you sustain doing charitable work. Should you ask a huge charity for the same amount of tangible appreciation or compensation as a tiny little boat that's fallen apart, but still out there doing social work in the community? Probably shouldn't be asking them for the same thing. But you do need to ask for what keeps you sustained. The idea here is not to keep building sites in a day, not to keep trying to be superheroes, but to look at the long-term sustainable client assistance experience for the sites that already exist that may or may not have a development team anymore after so many years. that may need to stay Drupal 7 or may need upgraded or may need just help with the broken module. So how do you change that? Well, it used to be that you just looked at the site, the speed, the quality, the cost, what needs to be done, because it was a one and done, one site stand, get it done, get it done, get it built, and move on to the next one. But if you're trying to do a long-term sustainable client assistance experience, it's not just about talking about the site. It's about figuring out how compatible you are at working with that client. Do you want to be on their board of directors? How do you handle when you're in a conundrum with that person? It's more about a long-term personality match there of compatibility. And so that's what needs to be talked about in the vote, because their site is already started. Hopefully there's already something there to look at. So I do a cute little short lightning round talking about this little compatibility compass. But I generally tell people to pick 3. How do they respond? They always say, oh, you do fight or flight, but there are people out there that try to fix everything or freeze up when there's a challenge. Pick 3 of those that describe you. How do you typically respond to a crisis? Fawn means to please and appease, like a baby deer. To fade means just to sort of, you're still there, but you're not really participating anymore. Flubbing means to intentionally just flub it up, to try to make waves or make problems, or to try to get out of doing it by doing a bad job. And fuss is, without trying to fight, you are trying to solve it, but you're just sort of fussing about it to try to fix it, but you don't maybe have the capacity to do so. So long-term sustainable client assistance, why would people even want to do that? Because some folks, like the folks here, realize that there is some really deep, innate, emotionally beneficial experience in using your unique skills for social good. And if you've never done it or never tried it and never had a positive experience with it, it's unfortunate, because once you have that positive experience, you realize that your impact can be exponential. By building our charity site, by keeping me involved in the Drupal community, the people that went through the trials and tribulations of upgrading that site and keeping me involved, whether they're glad they did it now or not, have benefited the lives of the elderly folks in the nursing home that I cooperate with and collaborate with, because I've stayed tech connected this whole year while they've been on quarantine and found a way to keep connected to them. So those folks that took the time have not just helped me, they've not just helped fix the site, they've literally helped isolated elderly folks who are suffering from a year's worth of being locked away in a room with a roommate they may or might not like, and no one to talk to, because we're trying to fix that. So doing social good and using your skills for building a site is more than just the site that you're building. It's the exponential work that it benefits. So your belief system on volunteerism and moral offsets. What makes it sustainable? What makes doing that kind of volunteer work sustainable? It's the velocity of socially beneficial circular economics. What do I mean by that? Wow, that's a big PhD level way to say. It's about the tangible appreciation. It's about the swag or the barter or the payment. It's about thank you letters and receipts and photos that can come out of that. And it's about ultimately whether or not you can value your in-kind donation, because it's intellectual property. It actually has royalties value. It's not just about your volunteer time. If you're giving a module or a site or a repair or an upgrade, that's a product. You sell it as a product. The agencies and website design agencies sell that as a turnkey product with a price. And so it has an in-kind donation value as intellectual property, as intangible or property with potentially royalty values if the organization can make money off of it by doing fundraising. It can also be valued at the goodwill advertising of putting your company or your agency or your your freelancing business's logo on there. How do you do all that? Well, it's one form with the IRS where you actually get to claim the value of what you just made as a volunteer, as a product, not a time of volunteerism, but the product that comes out of it. It's basically asking for the name, who you gave, what you gave it, who you gave it to, what you gave, and it's not that hard to fill out. It's not that scary. And if you actually needed help with doing one, I would literally help you fill that form out. Because if you contribute something that's worth $5,000, it could potentially bring back $1,000 in tax revenue, return, tax deductions to your company, to your agency. But if you cash in using charitable tax deductions, is that still a moral offset? Are you still doing volunteer work? Well, yeah, if you're using the receipt to legally take that in-kind tax deduction or ad expense, and then using the tax savings to invest either back into the charity that you're helping or back into the Drupal community. How can you do that? Saving the snowflake-sized sites can save the world. Pick the little projects. Pick the little projects. And then here's all the fun things you can do with that. You could offer incentives for charity case contribution and small site resource work. You could sponsor a coding volunteer to attend coding camps or contrib events. You could sponsor a charity case. Instead of calling them snowflakes, we're going to get into that in a second, I like to refer to the charity cases, the small charities, as mermaids, and I'll explain why. To sponsor a charity case, to attend coding camp or a contrib event, to host or maintain a charity case mermaids website as a free or reduced rate, to sponsor a crowd deving Mingo Bingo event at camp for Coding for a Cause version 2.0. I'll explain what Mingo Bingo is. Mingo Bingo is in a minute. Did I really have to put so many tongue twisters in my presentation? I named these things. Why did I make them tongue twisters? To sponsor a global fair wage or volunteer stipend for paid labor when appropriate. In other words, helping someone from another country get some volunteer paid development time with you as the volunteer supporter or connector of that happening. Directly invest funds into relevant charity, volunteer, or tech access programs. In other words, helping small charities like mine that work with Tech for Elders, helping the charity that we actually pay a little bit now to do our work is our front-end developer, Caroline, works with the kids robotics coding camp and team. So when we pay to have stuff done, we don't necessarily pay Caroline, we pay her Girl Scout troop that's doing Lego robotics projects. To stop making charity case mermaids cry by being just another one-site stand for them and, building something and then leaving it to languish. So rethinking the Coding for a Cause sprint. I think the sprint is, if you like adrenaline, it's a fun thing. If you waited 2 years to get a grant to make your site and then you coming to the end of the day and the site might not be finished and you may or may not have volunteers after that day, a sprint can be a big ball of stress if you don't like roller coasters or river raft rides and that much intensity. So what we've proposed is, instead of a sprint of trying to get a whole site built in a day, but you still want to connect on the human level with who can do the work. You want to meet the geniuses at the Genius Bar of Drupal. Why not do it in smaller bite-sized chunks? So that the idea of what you're trying to get accomplished in a day is to get names for each square in your bingo board as a client. I take my bingo card around and try to get my dance card punched, try to get my bingo card signed on by folks who have the skills to do the task that's listed in the square, if that's something that we need done. It takes the speed and stress of speed out of the equation so that it's a long-term project, but it becomes a short-term somatic client assistance experience that's a lot more fun for the volunteer developers and for the charity clients that are looking for the help. We proposed if you don't host a whole mingle bingo project, then to consider at camp putting up a tips for tasks bulletin board, a pegboard of at camp jobs that can be done. And instead of just hosting a contrib day where people may or may not have the energy by Saturday to contribute, to host a contrib club, one room of VIP taskers lounge at camp, where people who've already been to camp for the last 10, 15, 20 years, who don't really need to attend the same sessions, who kind of show up and kind of don't, and are multitasking virtually on their computer while they're listening in to the newest person present the same old stuff. If they don't need to go to sessions, but they want to be there with their friends, then open up an extra room to allow them to contribute, to fix, to be the genius bar, open the genius bar, essentially. The Contrib Club is a way and a place where broken charity sites can come for help, or that folks who don't want to fix broken charity sites can work on core and module and maintenance issues with their buddies. The point of doing that is to reduce the trauma and overwhelm, to just try to keep the boat in the water. These are tiny little boats that are barely making it as it is. Try to keep the boat in the water without running onto the rocks, without running ashore with a sprint. Do something that reduces the trauma and overwhelm of the client, at the same time gives the developer a chance to do something that keeps them from being bored and depressed to having just to do one more site from scratch in a day. Why? Why do it? Because it's all about the experience, really. Why stay with Drupal? Because it's about the people. It's in their logo. You come for the coding, you stay for the people. It's about the fun people that you meet. And, trying to reduce the developer's trauma, earning the customer's trust, making it an experience to have your site built. It was definitely an experience. It's a river rafting ride. But is that the experience you want every time, or do you want a little bit different experience when it's time to fix something that's broken? Do you want it to be dramatic and chaotic, or do you want it to be a little bit more one step at a time, relaxed and manageable and financially manageable if you can do it one piece at a time? So it's the talent of turning a site build into a positive, palpable, and memorable sensory adventure for the client. What does that mean? It's based on all the research of investing time into relationships, giving the chance to be expressive, having the right actions and behaviors take place with sharing the right thoughts and having meaning behind it, having shared images and emotions and sensations. Literally, after my first site build, our website still contains the scrapbook page of our original developers building our site in a Code for a Cause sprint for free. The challenge of being a Drupal superhero and the burnout is the ones who are doing the volunteer work are still doing it all alone. And I think that's the part that really needs to change. Doing a mingle bingo where they're sharing a part of it, having a contributors club, having a task bulletin board, having a person there to just help people figure out what it is that needs to go on the task bulletin board, and the developers that are looking for tasks be a human contact, means that they're not doing it alone, so that they can still be the freelance Jedi level freelancer, but do it in a tiny square and take 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to do that, to fix one little thing of something that's broken and change the world for that charity. Let me go back. Little story. My rebuild, there were a lot of pieces to the rebuild, but my absolute favorite part of having my site upgraded from a Drupal 7 to a Drupal 8 point something something was, if you look on our bingo board, R10, testing out new modules. When we took the time on Contrib Day with my volunteer who rescued me to test out new modules, it was like going and trying on shoes with the best shoe salesperson that ever lived. There were tissue flying, there were shoebox lids, there were modules flying everywhere, testing it out on the site. Do you like this? Do you like that? And honestly, by the time we were done, I had modules that worked for my site that it is what kept me as a customer of Drupal, because one or two new things that tweaked the old site, because I really just wanted the site we had rescued and rebuilt to look the same. In that, the person who rescued it said, no, we need to look at what you need different. We need to look at these, what's not working for you. We tried on new modules and it was like finding just the right shoe. And I felt like I was dancing. That was the experience. That was my favorite part of the experience. Asking that same volunteer to have to help with the other parts of the experience, that wasn't so much. Having to help with all the other parts of that big, long, involved process of a whole rebuild, and having them get to the parts that weren't their favorite when I didn't have a bingo board to work with, and I didn't have other people's names that were going to help us through the other hurdles that we would face in the rebuild. But that was one fun day that kept me coming back. Kept me coming back enough to be part of SFDUG, to present, to speak, to want to be there to help the other charities, and to want to be there to help the other developers, to have that experience, to make someone so happy they felt like they were dancing. And it's really about customer diplomacy. To really sum it all up and wrap it all up. Customer diplomacy. Have you ever had the chance, and some of you do the volunteer work. Have you ever had the chance to catch an Agile Dancing Snowflake website, a small website as a snowflake? How long could you hold on to it? Did you take the moment to look at it up closely? How did you keep it from melting? How did you keep the tears from coming when the stress got to be too much? And how did you keep that customer from just dancing away with the wind off to WordPress or somewhere else? So I've gone on too long already, but if you guys are up late, I'm up late. It's almost 10 o'clock. If you want to hear the bedtime story, I won't tell you who all the characters are, but it's about the scrapbook that came out of the rebuild and the process and the journey of who is now legendary to me. And customer diplomacy, who helped me as a customer through the customer diplomacy challenge that Drupal has. And it's about becoming a living legend amidst their journey. Their meaning the customer. To encounter a real benevolent mermaid, and I'm trying to get them away from the idea of calling small website owners, accidentally calling them snowflakes, even though it's considered a snowflake uniquely carved site. That terminology has gotten pretty politically misused in the current era. So if we transition to the fact that, benevolent mermaids in the story of the Little Mermaid, it's not the story that Disney tells, the Hans Christian Andersen version of the Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid tries to give up her, life as a mermaid to be human, to help humans, not to fall in love and live forever with the handsome prince. The handsome prince that she rescues goes to a beautiful princess that's already on land. The mermaid gives up her tail and ends up with 300 years of community service to humanity to try to earn her wings. So the challenge of encountering a real benevolent mermaid, of someone who's giving up their life for community service, to do social work, it's not for the weak or the weary. It's not, because rescuing a mermaid is every bit as challenging as any pirate will tell you in any book. Tangling with the mermaid has its challenges. But you take that little broken snowflake and you become legendary. Even if you're still doing it the old way of trying to meet your helpers at the bar at the after party and figuring out who's going to do the rescuing, you're becoming legendary amidst their journey, helping them figure out that it's not just about building a site and it's going to work forever without ever breaking, and it's going to work forever for free. There's a whole process to it of continuing to keep that site up and how you keep in communication with the people who are going to do the building and the maintaining and the fixing and the upgrading. It's about learning beyond the agile of having a site built to the joy of learning what DevOps means and how you as a small, tiny mermaid with a broken snowflake have to learn to be the continuous feedback and where you make that happen. So we put in ways that we've learned to do that, which is to volunteer to speak, to support a free customer diplomacy table or a grant at Drupal Camp. These are things that we think about as a way to give back, to host a Mingle Bingo event, at a camp, to start a tips for tasks board or to help with that process, or to host a camp's contributors club, the Genius Bar. So that if there are other small charities out there that need their Drupal 7 site fixed, or to stay in Drupal 7 or backdropped or dev paneled, or however, whatever their solution is going to be, to help them find their solution without having someone stand up and say, just go to WordPress. You're too small. We don't need you here. So this presentation was put together by Eileen. I'm Eileen. There's a lot of alphabets after my name, alphabet soup after my name. And if you ever want to figure out what all that is, I'll be happy to have a drink with you after a camp at some point. But if you'd like to look up our charity, that was built in Drupal 7 and upgraded this past year to Drupal 8 point something something, and is soon on its way to Drupal 9 with one more module that needs to be upgraded to go with that, then you're welcome to look at our site or contact me directly to learn more about how we use our Drupal site, why we care about other small snowflake charities that are out there doing the work, other struggling mermaids and mermen that are social workers who have turned to Drupal because we were recruited by Drupal in its earlier days. Then just give me a call. Images from Big Stock and all these Google searches. Some of the images were borrowed. And there's further reading. If you want this slide deck, you're welcome to request that, and I can happily email that to you. And there's links on customer diplomacy, getting away from the concept of customer service, that we just have to keep giving you what you want for free, to customer diplomacy, about teaching the customer what's fair and what's right, and doing what they need, but also teaching them how they need to treat the community that's serving them, and making sure that the charities that you're choosing to work for are compatible to you if you're going to go for the long haul of helping them. So there you have it. Questions? Comments? See, making me cry is not that hard. I literally made myself cry as I was doing this presentation.
So I have a question. After PhD, you had AD something on your name. What's that? I've never seen.
Sure. So I have a master's of art, and I got my master's of art after I got my teaching degree, so that I could teach art in various levels. So that's the MA. The MBA is a master's of business administration, which I started at a brick and mortar college here in Orlando called Rollins, and then finished online at Walden. While I was studying the MBA, I realized that I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector because I would never survive in business. Even though my husband owns businesses, and so we're entrepreneurs, and I do all kinds of marketing and graphic design and stuff for his business. The MSIDT was a Master's of Science in Instructional Design and Technology. I actually went back to learn how to use technology to teach adults for training. So that was the Master's of Science. We learned more about project management because technology changes so fast that they said, just look it up on lynda.com. Anything you want to learn how to do, if you want to learn more about technology, go to lynda.com, was literally what they told us. AC is the fact that I'm an activities consultant with nursing home activity directors, and help them with programming that keeps the nursing home residents busy, occupied, and having a quality of life. So I don't work in a facility anymore. I used to work in a facility as a director, and I had staff that worked with me. Now I help directors at facilities by being a consultant and through the charity, essentially, is why we started the charity. The PhD is in public policy, health policy, and nonprofit administration. The ABD means it's all but dissertation. I am still in the middle of the 7-year process of writing.
Okay, there you go.
So excellent question.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to drop. I have a hockey game at 9, so I will be talking to you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm dropping off as well. Thank you very much. This was a great presentation.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to all that.
Hey, Eileen, this is Don. Can you hear me?
I got to drop off for a second because the phone's ringing and it's not going to stop.
Alrighty.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like this presentation you've given elsewhere too, to maybe other nonprofits and stuff, to give them some insight into working with technology developers and stuff.
This is my very second time running through this presentation and my very second time of ever presenting with PowerPoint, and my very second time of ever presenting with PowerPoint online.
Okay. Well, how about your experience working with other peers of yours in the nonprofit space? And they may have, again, you know, my question was around sort of suitability of Drupal versus, like you mentioned, WordPress, go away and go do WordPress. So just kind of some insight into, if you have any, about that, what other charity organizations have experienced vis-a-vis, you know, Drupal versus a WordPress kind of thing. Not so much the technical people, but just experiencing the ecosystem around it, you know.
I think that's something that really, hopefully, is going to come up at the community, the free community chat day at Drupal, what is it? DrupalCon North America. Amy June, can you help me talk about that? Because I think it's different for everybody, and the size of charity makes a huge difference. And for small organizations, it still makes a huge difference. It made a huge difference for us to stay Drupal, mainly because we spent so much time. It was 2 years before we got the grant to have the site built that we prepared for the build. And so our site was customized very specifically for physical accessibility. And there was a lot of time and thought put into the design of our site. And so a lot of effort went into the front end look and feel of it. So it was definitely not worth it for us to just start over again in WordPress.
Yeah, that was a rebuild though. The grant and everything.
That's a rebuild. As a new build, I can't give that answer because I had to use WordPress in college, and it was just, it worked great for blogs, but it definitely wouldn't have worked to give us what we needed.
Yeah.
So it's really about one-on-one figuring out why that organization needs or doesn't need, you know, to use Drupal. Ours is not a huge, you know, wieldy site. Not heavy when it's not full of, you know, malicious files from hackers. It's a pretty lightweight site, but a lot of time and design effort went into it to make it visually and physically easy to navigate, more so than what's popular now. What's trendy does not work for our client base.
Does anybody else have any perspective on that? DeVito or Amy June or anybody else, as far as kind of the world of their business?
Yeah. I have I had an idea when I was watching all this, that I think it comes down to finding, it's a bit like a business. In a business, you need to have people who are skilled at certain things and are complementary. And so for example, you've got the CEO, and the CEO is actually the one who leads everything, but he's got the knowledge behind. So for example, he's got the knowledge behind Drupal, but he doesn't actually execute everything. He just delegates the things or negotiates, like, you're going to do this because I understand Drupal. but the people who are the outsiders, the people from the charity, they don't necessarily understand Drupal, how it all works. And so if they could talk to that CEO, so to speak, and this CEO could then delegate all those tasks among the other volunteers who have particular skills and who have come on board and maybe been chosen for their skills and for the love of what they do and what they're very good at, then I think it would be a more positive and orchestrated effort instead of saying like, let's build a site in one day and let's just put the best effort forward, you know? And I was actually thinking that it's something that I do for my websites as well, my platforms, is that I create something that is called a web dev or a web dev decision view, and everyone who has a certain kind of permission, they can add certain decisions that are being made, or maybe decisions that are put forward and being asked like, hey, what do you think? Could you approve this? Could you not approve this? Could you rate this with a 5-star rating or something like that? And then come to a conclusion, and from there make the site grow. And what if you had this kind of maybe template Drupal project that would be downloadable for any kind of charity to use as sort of a project management system on the side, that actually helps developing the actual charity project, or helps upgrading the charity Drupal website. What do you think about that?
Because I think it's interesting because Drupal has a lot of templates now, as far as they're working on templates to be shipped out with core and the different things. One of the things that I wish that we had when we did the upgrade was the volunteers spent a lot of time the night before trying to build out and spin up the basic sort of mock-up framework of my site based on an old version of it, so that we could then play with modules the next day. But ultimately then we tried to use what they had done the night before and use that for the rebuild. And really, if only he had just had a blank space, we could have tried out modules. I think, I'm not sure, if he had had sort of a blank practice space to try out modules and see how they look, without having to have done all of that night before, wanting to get a head start framework, because it was a lot of lorem ipsum and a lot of the wrong stuff in the wrong spot of, pulling from an old site. So
there's something called Simply Test Me,
mm-hmm.
simplytest.me. And in that website, you can actually select all the modules that you need, and then just go test them. And
see them, yeah,
and then you can abandon the. Sorry, say again.
Without having to worry about putting that whole framework together, it allows you to look at them out. Oh, that would have been great.
Yeah,
and it's browser based, so you can share the URL with people. Yeah. What's interesting is last year at DrupalCon, Dries had something to say about the Easy Out of the Box initiative, and we're working on that currently for this next DrupalCon, where they're putting together this experience where the installation profile is sort of ready to go. So they're working on like Claro and Layout Builder and media to have it kind of not built, but there for people to play with, like a
toolbox.
Yeah, so
like
I'm
ready
curious
to connect.
To see how that's going to go with people, you know what I mean? But that's like, it still needs a lot of work. That's why we're going to sprint on it at DrupalCon. But you can spin up the site and you can show your charity owners, this is what it looks like. You don't even have to have a different theme. You can just choose different colors, and have it be more of that out of the box experience versus that custom code and stuff.
Well, based on what you're saying, Amy June, it sounds like Drupal's still sort of in the same place. I mean, in terms of, it's not even in the same world. I mean, with WordPress, there's just so many billion kinds of templates you can, if you don't need something really specialized, you can just kind of click through them and probably find one that's, you know, pretty close, like instantly, and then you can adapt or adjust it a bit and probably be off and running quicker than doing anything with Drupal, I would think.
And that's true, but Drupal's
Okay.
more along the lines of that, like having that dynamic content, you know, like creating a view and having everything cross-reference each other and everything's an entity to one another, you know.
Mhm.
But that's if you have that kind of content. Like if you don't
Exactly.
have that kind of content, does it make sense to have Drupal? Because it does take a lot to,
Can I
you know.
add an interesting perspective to this question? I could, if, and here's my short answer. If I wanted to do it by myself in WordPress, I could have done that a long time ago. As my site started to fall apart and have issues and I couldn't log into it because there were too many, you know, restrictions with the parameters that were set when it was built. If I wanted to rebuild it by myself in WordPress, I would have done it. I wanted the chance to work with people. For me, Drupal is about the people. I wanted that experience of having it built. I loved, you know, it was chaos the day that we did, you know, sprint build in a day, but it was addictive to wanting to have that communication with other people to bounce ideas off of, because I already work alone in a silo of me and my volunteers and nobody else is tech savvy. And I needed to find other people to bounce the tech savvy questions off of, and the design and the graphics and the, you know, should we put this here or there? Should we divide this into two parts? All of that stuff for me needed to happen in community with others. And it's not just about choosing the code language that it's done in, it's about how much do I want to continue to invest to have other human beings to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, well, you're coming at it from a very different kind of angle, because you're really talking about a trip and a journey, if you will, and you're really looking at the drive along the way to the endpoint as being almost more valuable than just getting to the endpoint. I mean, you do want to get the site at the end, but I think a lot of people just want to get the thing done. You know, however you get there as quickly as possible, a little fewest amount of communication is even better. Just this is what I sort of want to get done.
And
I wanted
clearly
it
you've already
done.
answered the question. You don't even need to ask the question. You already answered it. Those are the people you want to send to WordPress to do it themselves.
Okay, well,
I think
Because they're going to push a team to get it all done so fast and may or may not appreciate the work that goes into it.
right.
But
True,
to say
true,
that
true.
out loud to everybody, that that's the answer for everyone, isn't really benefiting the Drupal community, because there are front-end developers out there who love doing the customization, who love making it different, who
But I
love sculpting that snowflake. So, you know, they need the chance to have that work without having to go through a back-end developer.
Right, but I think
give
as
them permission.
Drupal gets more complicated, like the jump from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 was this huge learning curve.
Mhm.
So your developers are now so much more expensive in Drupal 8 than they are in Drupal 7, because not only do they have all the Drupal 7 and Drupal 6 skills, but now they're learning Twig and they're learning Composer and they're doing all these best practices. And so all of a sudden your $135 rate jumps up to $175. And there's this balance, right? Of if you have custom code, you know, having to maintain that, where WordPress, they have the ecosystem of paid plugins, you know, so you pay for the plugin and someone else maintains it. Is that right? I don't know, you know, but it's like that plug and play versus the Drupal where it's always having to be maintained, you know. And like I said, as Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 and Drupal 10 come out, the expense of the per hour is huge.
Great.
I think
I'm
I
going to need
think-
to
I think
drop
we should-
off, but I wanted to say thanks. Okay, I'm sorry I had to go, but I wanted to thank you for your presentation, Eileen. And
Appreciate your question.
Yeah.
I really do.
I gotta go. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Don.
bye-bye. I feel